This conversation, I'm sure, will engage, provoke, and examine the current state and where we're headed. We're fortunate today to have one of the co-founders of The Bigger Discussion to help moderate and lend his voice on this discussion. He manages supplier diversity at Apple and is widely known within the supplier diversity network for successfully leading both the Northern California and Alabama Minority Supplier Development Councils to national prominence as the president and CEO. He is the author of Don't Be Afraid to Call the Baby Ugly, which reached #1 on Amazon in both supplier diversity and minority business categories. His newly released book is Hacking Supplier Diversity, Cracking the Code for the Business Case, Revenue Generation, Economic Impact, ROI. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Scott Vals.
I want to take a minute and say from the bottom of my heart, and I've been doing this a long time, of all the introductions I've had, that's definitely the most recent. So that being said, we are going to, I'm very excited about this because this is our first version of the Bigger Discussion with a regional council flair to it. So I'm excited. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be on YouTube, so everybody else will see what's going to happen. The Bigger Discussion, the whole point of it was to have a no-holds-barred discussion. Talk about the conversations that we had in the water cooler. My first book, Don't Be Afraid to Call the Baby Ugly, talked about the Bigger Discussion, and the whole point of that was in not being afraid to call the baby ugly, you talk about things that normally we wouldn't want to talk about, but sometimes need to be said to move the discussion in the industry forward. That being said, without any further ado, we are going to bring our panelists up here, and we're going to start with Lauren Hopkins-Taylor. She is the sourcing manager. Wait, walk slow because I got to help you up the steps or else my mom would be really mad at me. She is a sourcing manager, small business supplier diversity. I'm going to multitask. And you can sit wherever you want except my chair. For DuPont. Let's give her a hand. All right, next we got Shelly Brown. Shelly is the diversity solutions leader for Aon. Diversity sourcing. Anyway, reading's fundamental, so come on up. All right, next, where's Beverly? Okay, there you are. Beverly Jennings, a literal legend in supplier diversity. It doesn't say that, but she is. She's the head of supplier diversity and inclusion for Johnson & Johnson. And next we got Paige Benson. So Paige is the supplier diversity manager for Hinkles and McCoy with the Learning Center. So give her an extra. And the really cool thing about Paige is Paige stepped in at the last second. So we really do appreciate that. So that being said, I figure let's start off kind of slow with a question that's not too provocative. There are a whole lot of staffing companies. And there seems to be an abundance of these staffing companies. And Lauren, we'll start with you. Is there any advice that you could provide, because there's just so many staffing companies that keep
Absolutely.
coming?
So thank you for having me here today. I really feel honored to be selected for the panel. I know that was noteworthy. That's why it echoed. So let me give you a couple data points about DuPont. Our largest MBE, WBE, is our MSP for staffing. And in our program today, we have about 100 staffing suppliers under our MSP. This is North America only, which is pretty much what I'll be talking about today because of the audience. And so since I've been in the role about 4 years, I actually pulled this. I've met with 400 staffing suppliers and 425 IT suppliers. So that isn't to say that there isn't an opportunity, because as we merged with Dow and became a $73 billion company, and now are separating into 3 independently owned and operated companies next year, our landscape is changing significantly. But I thought it would help you to understand, if you're in staffing or IT, we're really looking for a differentiator. And my final comment is, for example, in staffing right now, we're desperately seeking staffing suppliers with farm labor certificates that can work in the Midwest and the Pacific Northwest. So there would be a great differentiator. Thank you.
Now, Paige, I knew you had a couple thoughts on that.
Yeah, so on the opposite end, Henkels & McCoy is a almost $2 billion corporation this year, and we're in heavy construction. And so I get the same calls, probably not to the volume that you do, but the same calls from the staffing companies that are looking to do business with Henkels & McCoy. And my first question is, do you staff laborers? Do you have heavy construction workers? Because typically we go to the unions in the Northeast, of course, to do that. And their answer is like, well, no, because they haven't researched our company. So if I had advice for a staffing company, it is to go into a specialty, whether it's like you said, in the pharma certificate space, or for us, if you had quality or safety or project managers or construction managers, that could be a specialty that would explode for you, because I haven't heard of any staffing companies, except for one, that really specifically focuses on the construction space.
All right, and Lauren, you said only 400, so that's kind of light. There must be many more of them. I don't know. But anyway, I digress. Is there anybody, now, according to the way this works, if anybody else wants to jump in, if I think we beat that horse to death, we'll go on to the next question. Bev?
I think
we beat that horse to death. I like it. All right, so this one's coming to you. Since there's a glut in that industry, are there any businesses in which you are having trouble finding diverse suppliers that you might like to see more?
Sure. Well, let me just start, since you mentioned I was a legend. All legends have traditions. So if you don't mind, I would like to just acknowledge, first of all, my Johnson & Johnson colleagues who are in the audience. And you can just wave your hand. You don't have to stand. Troy, Sarah, Karen, Joe. Thank you all for being here. And I have another tradition. I'd like to just ask any of the J&J suppliers just to wave your hands if you're a supplier of ours, so that we can thank you adequately. Oh, very good. I see a few hands over there, so great. Thank you for all you do for us. So as we look at, we have, first of all, just to give you some framing, in Johnson & Johnson, we have 30 major categories of spend. And so you can imagine we have a very large base of suppliers and a very large base of diverse and small suppliers. We do have particular categories that we often find a bit challenging to find suppliers. Of course, staffing is not one of them. We have, Kelly Services is one of our is a major MSP for us that we normally would route all of our suppliers through to Kelly, potential suppliers for staffing. So we're looking more in the supply chain, the direct material side. Johnson & Johnson manufactures products for pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and consumer products. So we are very, very broad. We're in 60 countries. We have 250 operating companies, 130,000 employees, so we're really, really large, and our spend is vast. So the main areas for us, we look at packaging is a huge opportunity for us, both secondary packaging as well as primary packaging. But it's challenging, Scott, when you look at it in these spaces, because you really have to go through a verification validation process. So it makes it very challenging for packaging. External manufacturing, contract manufacturing is another area. API biologics is another area. chemicals. Those are some of the more non-traditional ones that are often a challenge to find suppliers that can meet our needs on a national basis, but also international. So those are just a few that I'm pointing out. There are others, but those are the categories that are top of mind for me right now. So those are our challenges.
All right, Shelley, you want to jump in there?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shelley Brown. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with this group today. Thanks to Valerie and her team for putting on a great event, and to the board of directors. Really appreciate the chance to bring an Aon conversation today. I too have two colleagues here, Jeff Pope and Tia Wilson. If you could just throw your hand up there so we can get a chance to recognize you all. Thank you for your time and support as Aon continues to grow its strategy in the space. Categories for Aon. First, I want to make certain we're all on the same page. Aon is the leading risk retirement and benefits provider globally. It's a really great opportunity to be on this panel with our clients, not only talking about how we add value, but in particular how we add value around minority business. So thanks for that. With that in mind, we are a bit of an outlier around our supplier diversity strategy. We are focusing on skills and scopes of work and services that match what we take to our clients outside of the core where you see a lot of impact around diverse spend, manufacturing, operations, logistics, staffing, et cetera. We're looking for partners who help us in both our procurement strategy, so we have category teams that we work with, and our procurement team focusing on North America buy also sit outside of the US, so keep that in mind. And then beyond that, we also developed a platform where we take diverse suppliers with us to the market. So when we engage with DuPont or J&J and they ask for a diversity solution, we work not only to bring that strategy through our procurement spend, but also when we go on a risk retirement or benefits project. So if you are in that space, you add those kinds of value equations to the conversation, that's what we're looking for.
Paige, Lauren, either one of you want to jump in there? Don't feel like you have to, but if you want to.
Well, I would just echo what Bev said around some of the non-traditional areas. We're still looking for small and diverse suppliers, would be in our raw materials space and our energy. So anything with utilities would be very unique and be a differentiator. So those would be two, just to add to what Bev said.
We're continually looking for heavy construction companies, excavating, cranes, paving, milling, marking, drilling, boring, lining, and also cabling.
And I think at this particular point,
Scott, may I actually expound on something that I think will kind of have us jumping in? You were talking about construction earlier, and we were talking about some of the challenges in finding suppliers in this space. And I know internally we've had discussions, right, around construction, and just a thought on this is that I know that most suppliers who are in the construction space that are really large, they really want to go after the bigger contracts, right? Which is understandable. But, you know, when you look at this and you think about coming into a J&J or a DuPont or somewhere else, I think most of our categories would be pretty hesitant to award a really large contract. In fact, it just wouldn't happen. The reality is you have to get to know us, you know, and many said, well, how do we get to know you? Well, you know, all I can say is the good old internet is a great way to get to know us, right? Our annual report is another great way to get to know us. But information, there's so much out there, right? So when someone comes up and says that, you know, what does Johnson & Johnson do? You know, I just kind of go, really? Right? Really, you're asking that? Okay. Because it's really important that a company does, you know, do your homework, right? So this is part of that bigger discussion, is doing your homework. But in the construction side, you can imagine with the huge projects that we have, and I know Joe Burdell is somewhere in the audience, and he's more in that space, most of us would be very reluctant to award a really large contract to a construction company that we have never done business with. And so what we always recommend is that if you want to do business with us, consider the smaller projects to get to know us, right? To understand our culture, how we work, build some relationships, take it slow, kind of ramp up, and earn the right to bid on an RFP for a much larger construction project. So I just wanted to share that because we had talked about that earlier today.
So let me just kind of expound on that, and anybody feel free to jump in this. So if I'm an MBE and I just joined the council, got my certification, and I'm all set to go, about how long do you think it's going to take before I can do some business with one of you guys?
I'll give a shout out to that, right? So there's a formula to pursuing opportunities in the aggregate with most Emsdc corporate members. And this, I really hope you do find value add, and if you write it down, that's great. So it's a formula, okay? So CQD divided by KLT. Cost, quality, and delivery divided by know, like, and trust. So let's break that down. Cost, quality, and delivery. Cost important, but if you don't have quality and you can't deliver, probably not ready to take on an opportunity. Let's talk about the KLT, the know, like, and trust. People do business with people they know, like, and trust. So let's further break that down. The certification, yes, table stakes, helps me get to know you. Like you, do you add value and how you create value? And then trust, who else do you do business with? Let's further break that trust down. You should know whether it's your personal or your professional life. Know what you have to offer and know what you want. And if you don't have a good, crisp answer at the ready at any time, whether at the breakout sessions or at the elevator or standing in line at the serving line, and you don't have good answers that build trust and momentum, well, put yourself in the audience's perspective. How likely are you then to do business with the person you're talking with? So I just wanted to offer that up.
Anybody else want to jump in there?
I could add something there, Scott. So in DuPont, we have something called the Spend Initiative Pipeline. So we can see at any given moment, on any given day, all of our upcoming competitive bids across all categories of buy. It gives me great visibility. So what I do is I go in there once a month. I look at all the suppliers that are already pre-qualified, and I send the buyers a note saying, I see you have an upcoming opportunity for a competitive bid in XYZ. I have some readily available pre-qualified suppliers, and they need to be included because we have a metric that says 60% of all our competitive bids will include at least one small and diverse supplier. So that helps them meet their metric. It introduces suppliers into our supply chain, and they're already pre-qualified. So I've done that initial piece of work for our corporate buyers, and then they take it to the next level. And that has been really successful for us. The other point I would make is it doesn't always have to be a direct buy with DuPont. Partner with somebody. We love tier 1, tier 2, big, small, differentiated offerings. We did this with our lab supplies buy a couple years ago. Okay, it's a big number contract. Whoops. And we have a large company that partnered with an MBE, and as a result of that, not only did they win the DuPont bid, but that's a model they've now replicated. So those are some other opportunities.
Can you imagine how big that number is if it's a 40 big number? Like, I don't even know what that is. So, Anybody else want to jump in there? If not, we'll move on. Paige, you look like you want to say something. You have that I need to say something.
It's a long process with Hinkles & McCoy. We're a privately owned company. We've been in business for 95 years. A lot of the people who are making the decisions have been in their positions for 2 decades, 3 decades, and they have people that they know and they trust on the CQD, and in construction, safety is especially important front. So I think that what Ms. Beverly said earlier about taking on small pieces and being not grateful, not like, oh yeah, I got a little piece of the pie, but learning the culture at Hinkles & McCoy, because that's what's allowed us to be successful year after year, and growing from there. One of our biggest diverse suppliers started with us almost 20 years ago and has grown to a $36 million a year corporation, mostly based on the strength of Hinkles & McCoy. So there's room for growth when you get your foot in the door. Get your foot in the door, do it correctly, do it safely, deliver on time, go with your promises, and know that it's going to be a slow process. It's going to be very, very slow.
That's a long time right there. That's very slow. Okay, we all go to these trade shows and we go to these expos and wonderful events like this. What's the biggest no-no or mistake that you see our MBEs make that you just wish you could be, don't do that again? So, Bev, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it earlier about doing your homework. You know, it's amazing. Sometimes you have suppliers that will come up to you and say, you know, the last time we talked, we were doing X, Y, and Z. I want you to know that we progressed to, you know, to this level, that level. These are the folks that we've talked. They have just mastered that elevator pitch. And I can learn more from them in terms of what they've been doing with J&J for the last year, sometimes in a 5-minute conversation. But it's also because they've been following up along the way. So I think probably the biggest no-no, other than really not doing your homework, is an expectation that we're going to follow up with you, because we're not. The reality is we have, you know, a very large supply base, and we consider our suppliers just so important in our business. It's in our credo. Our credo was written back in 1943, and it still stands very strong today. I know many of you have read our credo, but it really speaks to our responsibilities, you know, with those lives, those billion lives we touch every day, responsibility to employees, responsibility in the communities where we live and work, and also to our shareholders. And so, you know, when I ask someone, do you know about our credo, and they start talking about it, I'm just so impressed. I'm like, wow. You know, they really know our culture, they've done their homework. But when someone comes up to me and asks me, what does Johnson & Johnson do? You know, it's just, for a company that's, you know, over 130 years old, and for someone to ask me that, I guess the best word is disappointing. And I'm sure other corporations feel the same way, that if you're going to take your valuable time to approach us at a trade show or somewhere else, that you've done your homework, and that and that you're able to give an update on where you are and what you've tried. But don't let us have to pull that out of you, because the reality is that next person is waiting for that conversation as well, and they may walk up a whole lot more prepared. So, you know, lead from your core strengths. I know you have multiple capabilities, but sometimes it's better to lead from your core and be very deliberate and intentional about what it is you would like to see as an outcome. So.
And I'm going to let Lauren jump in there next, but I would like to tell you one thing, here's what not to do. So, I was at the Emsdc conference last year, you know, working the booth, got tired of working the booth, and this guy, who shall remain nameless, you know, followed me. Hey man, I just need 5 minutes of your time, just 5 minutes of your time. I said, okay, well, hold on just a second. So, to get away from him, I go to the bathroom. And he follows me into the urinal. And he is standing in the urinal right next to me, going, hey man, I just need like 5 minutes of your time. I know you're busy. So, you know, I'm just saying, that might not have been,
We weren't going to tell that.
that might not have been, well, I'm not going to tell you what happened to him, but let's just say when he left, his shoe was wet. So, Lauren, jump in there.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, let me try to follow that. Not. Okay, so I would say two things come to my mind. One is to know who we are when you come up. I know Bev just articulated that, but I wanted to add, think of it like a mini interview. If you were going for a job, would you walk in and say, who are you and what do you do? I doubt it. You know if we're going to be at a trade show and you know you can come to our booth, so plan strategically. I'm going to just talk to these 10 people and I'm going to do my homework so when I meet with them, the engagement is viable and interesting and perhaps relevant. The second thing is sometimes suppliers walk away and I really don't know what you do, what you're trying to sell to DuPont. And so I'll often say, and what exactly are you trying to sell to DuPont? And if they can't give me a 1 or 2 or 3 sentence answer to that, it's hard for me to move them forward, even if I love them, right? So try to be crisp in what you're asking us to consider you to do for our company. That's very helpful. So a funny story about that, I had a whole DuPont team. Most of you know that we usually have 5 to 7 people at every event. We had the group there last year at the Emsdc conference in Detroit. One of the DuPont employees wanted to walk around and talk to other people in other booths. And she had heard so much that day of suppliers coming up to us and saying, who are you and what do you do? That she actually went up to Google's supplier diversity manager and said, who are you and what do you do? And the person was like, and she goes, never mind, I'll just Google it.
I'll add a couple of thoughts for you. I've heard a few suppliers throughout the years say, I can provide fill in the blank and I can save you 20% on what your spend is now. I don't know how you can do that because how do you know what we buy? I'm at Aon now almost 2 years, spent 12 years with Johnson Controls. And in both instances, I will tell you the procurement teams are very good at what they do. And it's very difficult to make that kind of blanket statement without qualified and quantified data. So I would caution you, if that's in your script, maybe think about that. The second thing I would encourage you to do is to think about the corporations attending Emsdc events, and I want to pull back and bring in the conversation we had about a staffing agency. We attend trade shows, we in the aggregate, I'll say, will attend a trade show much like the model of a staffing agency does. Think about what procurement category goals are as the job order, especially if you're in the staffing agency business. You work the job order, not the resume. Okay? So let me put it a different perspective. You may be able to split the atom on the dark side of the moon, but if we're not buying it, we're not buying it. I really appreciate that you're a great atom splitter on the dark side of the moon, but if we're not buying it, we're really not buying it. Hopefully that helps.
Can I just say one thing? Shelley's voice is so calming, isn't it? Like I was just like, woosah. But anyway, Paige, jump in there.
In addition to what everybody else said here, I actually, before I was in procurement and supply chain, I was on the sales side. And one thing I notice when I speak to the business owners, which we speak to a lot of them, is that sometimes they're not the best seller of their business. So if you know that you are maybe nervous or you drone on, or you're not really sure how to get people interested and likable, maybe you should send somebody else to sell your business for you. There's no shame in that. And if you are all members of Emsdc, they have resources available to help you improve, not just the elevator speech where you go off for 60 seconds or and go blah, 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 but like actually make you a personable and likable person. If you're not the best salesperson for your business, which you want to grow, send somebody else and make sure that they can speak eloquently to what your business provides. It'll make our job happier too.
So you're saying if you're a great chef, don't mean you should open a restaurant.
I
Okay.
agree.
So you mentioned NMSDC, and so I know we all get challenged with supporting multiple organizations. How do you determine which ones you're going to support? And obviously we support this one, so don't say anything good about Valerie right now. Just
So we've had a supplier diversity program for 45 years. So we've kind of been at this for a while. And many of you know that I report to Shelley Stewart, who's our Chief Procurement Officer. And if he was here, you'd be the other Shelley.
He's the other Shelley, always.
Yeah.
ooh, that's on film.
But having said that, we support all of the national councils and all of our local councils where our corporate headquarters reside, which for us right now is Wilmington, Delaware. And we do work closely with the state of Delaware. So that helps me to be credible and explain who we support and why we support them. And then we will support, let's call them one-off requests, if we can either add value or get value by doing so. So that's how we make our decisions.
The way that we, first of all, in Johnson & Johnson, we're very prudent when it comes to our financials. So we're always cognizant of managing our budgets. So each year we basically start from a clean sheet of paper and work our way up. And how we determine those that we will support has a lot to do with the relationship that we've had with them the prior year, and also how what each of the organizations provide help us to meet our business goals. So we have an annual planning process like many other corporations where you set goals. And we really look at everything. We look at, the certification value. We look at responsiveness is a really big deal because sometimes, we may only get, in most cases, we get a little more time to tee up suppliers, but every now and then, we may get a rush where, okay, we need a diverse supplier to be a part of this RFP. We have it. That is a requirement pretty much for our RFPs. And, but occasionally, they may want to say, well, let's see if someone has something a little more innovative out there. And then what we'll try to do is we'll reach out mostly to, like Emsdc and others, and just say, do you have any suppliers that we can consider in this space? And we kind of need it quickly as an example. So we look at the responsiveness, we look at how we are engaging within each of the affiliates or the RPOs in the case of WeBank. So we look at value. Bottom line, we look at value in determining where we're going to, what we're going to financially support. But we're also looking for innovations. And so, hats off to Henkel for supporting the Learning Lab. That's great. We're looking for movement. That is huge.
Let's give a round of applause. Yeah. Y'all didn't really seem like you appreciated that when they were talking about it.
That's huge because we have innovation centers around the world, right? And to hear that, that you're thinking in this direction and you're getting the support from Henkel, I'm like, wow, that's what we're looking for. We're really looking for thought leadership. Particularly in Johnson & Johnson, we are one of 28 corporations that are part of the $1 Billion Roundtable. We were the first healthcare company to be inducted. Thank you. And we are always, in that, it's all about thought leadership and best practices. But we know that a lot of the best practices come through the affiliates. And so we are just eager for those best practices, eager for support. So when we are making decisions, we remember things like this are critically important where the organizations are trying to advance the suppliers, because that's part of supplier development for us. And that's very high on our radar at Johnson & Johnson. So those are the kinds of things that we consider.
So Shelley, we're going to pivot for a second, and because we got some questions coming, what's the one thing you wish people knew about your job that they just don't know?
Okay, so I'm sure Shelley would share that carrying Shelley as a handle, that's a heavy handle to carry sometime. But in the same token, dealing with no, okay? Johnson Controls was a $1 billion roundtable and still is a $1 billion roundtable member. I was with that organization for 12 years, coming up on 2 years with Aon. And in both cases, whether you're in the $1 billion roundtable, that top tier talented 10th that W.E.B. Du Bois spoke about, that talented 10%, you still got to deal with no. No, why would we create a diversity solution there? How is that going to add value and help us achieve our goals? Aon, manufacturing and operations and construction at Johnson Controls, Aon, professional services, financial services. Okay, help me understand how this is really going to help add value for our client and help us be a better and stronger organization. So you have to get comfortable with no and figure out how to make that no into a yes. The supplier diversity role is very challenging in that you deal with that from your colleagues left and right. You look to suppliers to be able to help you, and you look for your clients to help pull that engagement along. You've got to be that catalyst to help turn that no into a yes.
All right, we got some good juicy questions here, so we are gonna, because we are running, we've got about 10 to 12 minutes left, so I'm just gonna shout out the questions, and whoever wants to take it, okay? So, and for those of you with poor penmanship, your question won't get read. So, and this kind of piggybacks off something we talked about earlier. How do you like to be contacted? LinkedIn, email, phone calls, and how often?
Email. It's a work order. You asked me to do X, I got to give it back to you by Y. Please don't reach out on LinkedIn.
Please don't.
Please don't. With all due respect, please don't reach out. If you're a supplier in particular, let me qualify that. Please don't reach out on LinkedIn, because I'm in her LinkedIn network. I'm in her LinkedIn network. I will be in Pages hopefully after today. But the reason I say no is because I've heard from my peers, my colleagues that say, some supplier is just trolling through my LinkedIn network, and now it's making me have challenges with my stakeholder relationships.
All right, next question. We talked about certification. Do you value certification at all? And how so?
So in and of itself, diversity for Henkels & McCoy is not a differentiator. Just diversity by itself is not a differentiator. So all the other value-added items that they discussed, innovation, delivery, quality, et cetera, those are differentiators, but diversity in itself is not. Now, if you are a diverse category, certification is a must. We cannot get self-certified or people who say that they are diverse on their own. We have to have that certification. So if you are diverse, it's a bonus, but it's not a differentiator.
So you shouldn't lead with, hey.
You should not lead with it, but it's definitely a necessary thing to have for us to even care that you're a diverse company.
Oh, this is going to be a good one. So, should all of the staffing suppliers in the room just leave?
No. You should. Let me take that one. You shouldn't leave. But you know what I think? What you are hearing here is there is a need for you to differentiate yourself. There is a need to become more innovative. And I actually was thinking about this too. You know how you start when you start a business? For those of you who may have had a startup like in the last 5-10 years. You know, you start out and you do your market assessment, the market analysis, you figure out how you're going to segment, you go through all of that, right, when you start up your business. But often, there's not a check along the way to find out how competitive you're remaining. And so, often we'll get calls or we'll get emails where someone will say, we're the only ones doing this. There's no other company doing this. We're the only minority-owned company or woman-owned business that's doing this. And of course, for us, we get calls all the time and emails all the time, so we've seen hundreds of these, right? So I think you have to do your own homework and shop your market, the competitive landscape, so that you could figure out how to go to market differently and stronger. So that would be my recommendation. No, don't just go away. This is a call of action to raise the bar and get better.
And to your point, I think Lauren and Paige gave some specific examples of where there are some opportunities or some niches for those contingent labor companies to pivot into. All right, so
Scott, let me
please jump in.
that probably was prompted because of my introductory comments, so I feel compelled to say something. One, partner with somebody else. Again, that creates a differentiator where you're both stronger and better. The other thing is, look at our landscape. We have everything on our website. You can look at our sites and say, wow, I know you have staffing suppliers working at, your Sabine site in Texas. We have large presence there. We really can be competitive in that area, and we can provide staffing for whatever goods or services you've got. That would be a real introductory point for us, because we have 100 staffing suppliers in our current portfolio, but we do often need suppliers that are very local to our sites. And so knowing where our sites are and where you're strong would be a real differentiator for you.
Are there any examples, because each panelist provided, and this is really cool because this is like Twitter, so it's done anonymously, so I think people are honest. So each panelist provided information on what MBEs should not do. Do you have examples, or please provide examples where corporate members, have you ever found like a good MBE at some of these events that you go to?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, they said, because evidently somebody doesn't believe you have.
That's found. Persistence is key. Not like an email every day or every month type of thing. But if I've been in this role for almost 3 years now, and I've seen some of the same faces at the majority of these conferences, whether it's minority or women-owned or veteran-owned or whatever, and just to drop by and say, oh, hey, Paige, nice to see you again. I haven't talked to you about this. Did you still have an opportunity in this? Because if you listen, I talk a lot, and I probably give you some ideas on where our company is going and where the opportunities are being, so following up on that. And then also just making sure that if you didn't have something the first time I saw you, that the next time I saw you, you're like, hey, I followed up with your thoughts about having staffing companies in the construction space. And what I've done is I've gone around to the unions within Philadelphia and asked how I could get on a list so I can be able to talk to them or provide people to them or figure out how that space works. Those kinds of things make you stick in my mind. And I'm in construction specific, but stick in my mind as somebody who is trying to do something that is relevant to my business.
And I will say supplier diversity is a very, for lack of a better word, ancestral industry. So the thing is, just because you may hear a no from me, that doesn't mean that if you resonated with me, I might reach out to Shelley and be like, hey, when you need such and such, this supplier I can't use them now, but you might be able to. So, but Shelley, jump in there.
Let me pull on that thread. Look for needs triggers, M&A activities, expanding global operations, right? Landing a new client. So your target client landed a new client, and you understand both of them to have an interest around supplier diversity, right? So if the solution that you're looking to offer to Aon is something that you add value at DuPont, and DuPont is an Aon client, if you're a strong enough provider for our client, gosh, we should take a good look at you as well. So this customer-directed spend, or the voice of the customer in your engagement process, could be something that you should consider as well. Get their consent. Make certain that you're not trading without, their consent, that that's something that they're willing to get behind. But make certain that when you do engage, you offer that, because that is meaningful and impactful. Business is all about relationships.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, talking about relationships, we're in the supplier diversity space. We live this each and every day. But the reality is most of us have very small staffs. And our relationships are with the category. So I've had people ask me, Bev, is it okay for me to reach out? I know this person. Inside of J&J, what I always say is work your network. Because that is so, so important. So, we're not the only game in town. If you have relationships within a corporation, work that and find your way. We can help navigate. We can help prepare you, work with you. But by all means, we have large corporations, and feel free to connect in the ways. And I'm not opposed to LinkedIn. I prefer email. These days I hardly ever check my voicemail, but I try to remember to do that on occasion, right? But email works, and we try to get back and be super responsive to you to at least let you know that we've received a bit. But again, work your network. Very, very important.
And so since this is a bigger discussion, the regional version, we are going to pivot, because this thing could go anywhere. So this question, I'm going to point to Valerie.
Oh, woo.
All right, Valerie, yes. To earn the trust and expertise with large corporations, what does a corporation do to connect those prime suppliers already in the supply chain with the smaller new MBEs trying to get their attention?
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah.
You gave me the hardest question of the entire panel.
Well, you're the one holding up our ask hard questions, so. How does that shoe fit now? No, but jump in there.
I'm sending you back to California. So one of the major initiatives that we have, and one of the things we focus on was our large corporations, is having them identify their large tier one suppliers, because oftentimes that is a great opportunity for businesses to connect in the supply chain. Everyone focuses in, and Jay doesn't know this, I'm just like in a Comcast state of mind today. So everyone focuses on Comcast because, we get that bill every month. And so, we want to do business, recoup some of the money we spend with Comcast by, doing business with Comcast. It's very personal. But what you don't know is that CTDI is Comcast's, and sits on the board of the Emsdc, is one of Comcast's largest tier one suppliers. And so there's an opportunity. And CTDI, that remote control that you hit to turn the channel? CTDI is the source of that remote control. And so there's an opportunity there. And we have an MBE that packages and provides the batteries that come to you with that remote control that's certified by the council. So the opportunity for that connection with the tier one supplier always exists, and it's very important that we look to them. So it's about corporate members being transparent. So this is back to the corporate members, about you being transparent about who your major tier one suppliers are, and then helping us figure out how we can connect our MBEs to those tier one suppliers for those opportunities.
And I think it's important for the MBEs to let you know that that's something they're very interested in, so you can reach out to the corporate members and say, hey, can you bring some of your primes? And the only reason I say that is because I go to a lot of these conferences, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, then I'm going to turn it over to you guys for one final thing. I've been to, I can't tell you how many of these conferences, and I will see MBEs, WBEs, LGBTQBEs, veteran business owners who are the CEOs and the ultimate decision makers in their company push each other out of the way to get to me, who, if you get to me, it's probably going to be a year, 2 years, if you get an opportunity. But you will push out of the way someone who could make that contract decision that day, right then and there. So when we talk about meeting with the prime suppliers, we've also got to learn to think of ourselves as prime suppliers. Like, you are the decision maker, you're the owner. What better opportunity than to speak to the owner of the company? I mean, Bev is probably the most important person up here, and she's not the owner. So I'm just saying. So now, yeah, jump in there.
May I just add something to what Valerie was saying earlier? Because, you know, it's serendipitous in a way, because this morning was having a conversation when one of the MBEs came over and said that they've been working with a prime of ours in one of those categories that I mentioned that we're trying to improve in. And I said, well, what are you doing? And they were telling me how we're focusing on the tailspin in this category with our prime. And we've been trying, like for 3 years, I've been trying to move this along. And I always find out what we're doing when I come to events like this. So this is my value, right? I get to find out what's going on. But they were saying we're working with the prime, we're working with the category leader, we're working on this tailspin initiative. I'm like, really? Tier 1? I asked them to do this like 3 years ago. And every time I'm at Emsdc, we have a conversation with this prime. So I come here today, and I hear that we're actually moving along. So it's efforts like that, you're right. If we're not asking the prime, I can tell you it's unlikely it will ever happen. So it's our responsibility as corporations to really encourage those relationships and to lead by example.
And the last thing we'll do is, so I feel like in supplier diversity, I often joke and say, we're hated by everybody. So you come to these things and there be some MBEs that'll be mad because they couldn't get an opportunity, or I wasn't as responsive as I should have been. I may go inside my corporation and, you know, they see me coming and say, oh, here's Scott, he wants to talk about some other stuff. And so I may not be popular there. Why on earth do you do this? So Shelley, jump in there, then we'll go Lauren, Bev, Paige, and I will close it out, and this will be done.
Okay, so again, thanks for, you've done a great job moderating. Thanks for taking us on the journey. Real quick, I'm going to tell you a real quick story. So I'm originally from Missouri, and our family business in Missouri is politics and government. And I had an opportunity at that time to get a call from the governor, who I've known since I was 9, come on over to my office. And I was at that time doing some lobbying work, so I packed up some legislation, thinking we're going to go talk about, you know, making a deal. And when I get in the governor's office, it's the governor, his chief of staff, and my mother. And he says, I understand you've had a couple of businesses. Tell me about that. And I didn't know anything about MBE. And long and the short of it was, he asked me to run the state of Missouri's Minority Women Business Program. And that's how I got involved into this journey in 1996. At that time, and any time, you only get a chance to tell a governor no once, right? My mother is also a reason why I'm in this journey. She investigated race, sex, gender discrimination. She implemented ADA compliance laws in the state of Missouri. So I'm trying to somewhat continue the family business in that thread by making certain that the organizations I have the privilege to represent do an equitable job with respect to minority women businesses and the like. And I really am passionate about that journey. I think it adds value. I think it adds value to shareholders. I think it adds value to the community. And I also think it helps to connect, you know, corporations who seem to be so far out of the grasp of the small business and the entrepreneurs. So really, really appreciate that chance to connect and hopefully make a difference.
Lauren?
So first I want to just thank Valerie and her team. Since you've come on board, Valerie, I felt like you've been a game changer in this area with respect to the MBEs. You have a really out-of-the-box kind of thought process. You're not afraid to tackle the tough stuff, and you've had some pretty tough stuff since you've been in the role. You're an amazing listener. The things we've asked you to engage in, you or your team have. So I just would be remiss if I didn't stop and say thank you, thank you, thank you. So like Shelley, I also have a Shelley story to conclude my remarks today. So again, many of you may know that he's really a legend in supplier diversity.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was going to say it's kind of annoying when I go somewhere with him because he's like a celebrity and I can never get him up to the stage where he's supposed to be. But having said that, he came to me one night. He had only been at DuPont for less than a year, and he said, "Hey, I really don't know you very well, but what I know and what I've seen and what I've heard about you, I like. So I want to ask you something, and I absolutely don't want you to answer me tonight." And I'm thinking, okay, am I getting fired? Like, do I need to change my clothes? So he said, "I really want to escalate the prestige, the external presence, the branding of our supplier diversity program, and I would like you to consider taking the lead. It's going to be a journey, but I'll be on the journey with you. Again, don't answer me tonight," he says. So before he leaves, I kind of reach out. He has amazing suits, just like this, Shelley. And I kind of grabbed his suit jacket. And I said, "Shelley, I'm in." And first of all, he goes, "I told you not to answer me tonight." So I said, "I'm all in." So my message to the audience here today is if you're not passionate about what you do and you're not committed to doing it the very best you can, don't be in the role.
Bev? Yeah.
Thank goodness she said that I could go next and not last. So I also would like to thank you guys for not going too hard on me as a last minute fill-in. It was an honor to be serving on this panel. It was very interesting to hear it from this end of it. My father is a serial entrepreneur, and he did a stint as the Urban League president in Seattle. And he came up with some innovative programs to help a trucking coalition so that truckers could band together and go after larger contracts. He spoke to me about that throughout the length of the process, almost a decade ago, about the difficulties he was having amongst the truck driving, the business owners, also with the corporations that he was trying to get to buy in the idea that a coalition would be able to service them as well as a big company that had a fleet of trucks and stuff like that. And I really was struck by his passion and the amount of time that he spent, you know, trying to get these business owners that were really good at what they did and really passionate about what they did, opportunities to change their lives. And so when I had the opportunity to go into supplier diversity with Henkels & McCoy, I had a taste of it in my previous job at BPMI. I really was like, you know what, this is what my dad was talking about the other day, back in the day, and maybe I can make a difference like he did. So that's really how I got into supplier diversity, and I feel like I'm rewarded on a regular basis by some of the corporations that I see and some of the businesses that I see where the passionate owners are doing stuff every day that I, at this point in my life, don't have the risk tolerance to go after and do it with passion and vigor. So thank you guys for bringing your stories to me and your businesses to me and allowing me to see a slice of your life. And I continue to hope that I'm able to serve you guys and help you guys get to where you want to go.
Okay, so first of all, you know, as I look at my supplier diversity journey, I truly stand on the shoulders of a whole lot of people. Because when I came in about 10 years ago, I heard of the legendary Scott Viles and many other legendary people in the space like yourselves. And I literally just dove in and I was like, you know, I'm going to learn all I can But how I actually got to it is an interesting story. This year I celebrate 30 years with Johnson & Johnson. Yeah, I can't believe it. I started when I was 2. And Johnson & Johnson, we're pretty deliberate on how we develop leaders. So during my 20th year, my boss, who's the CPO in our consumer group, Brian McGrath, asked me for my 20th anniversary, hey Bev, what do you want to do? Do you want to, our tradition in J&J, you have a nice lunch, you get people in a room, you go to a restaurant, you celebrate, you get a gift. I said, you know what, Brian, I just want the 2 of us to go to lunch. And Brian McGrath was a legend, truly, in Johnson & Johnson, just an amazing CPO for the consumer group. So we went to lunch, and he said, well, what do you want to talk about? And I said, I want to talk about the next 10 years. And I started to tell him what I wanted to do. I said, these next 10 years, I've loved what I've done. I've been vice president of process excellence for the consumer group. I've run a manufacturing organization of 1,200 people around the clock. I felt like I'd sort of done a lot of stuff. I'd worked with our marketing teams in the roles and all, company presidents in consumer. And I said, I want to do something that's really, really meaningful, that touches lives. And I said, I also want to do something that's super challenging. So do you have anything where we're in last place? Because I would like to move the consumer group from last place to first place. And he said, I do. We're in last place in supplier diversity. And I said, what is supplier diversity, right? And fast forward to today, so I did a stint, additional responsibility in supplier diversity for the consumer group, and then moved into the role almost 8 years ago now to lead this for Johnson & Johnson worldwide. So it's just been a great journey for me because it meets for me at the intersection of what I love the most. First of all, people, number 1. Secondly, I love growth, number 2. And thirdly, and most importantly, is it's a higher purpose. So it meets all of those things for me.
Wow. So this brings to the conclusion this version of the bigger discussion, so trying to take it regionally. So let me put out this challenge. We've had 5 of them on YouTube, and so far combined there's over 100,000 views. So this is our first regional attempt. So once we post it, get out there, look at it, tell all your friends about it. They can find out more about the council, maybe get some insight. I would like to congratulate Valerie and her board of directors for making this happen. And when I say making this happen, I do not mean the bigger discussion. I mean, I've done 5 of these, and literally this is the first chair I've ever sat in where I couldn't put my feet on the floor. Like, that is amazing. Like, I'm 6'5", and I can't put my feet on the floor. And next, please feel free to join me outside where I will not be signing books, although there is a sign. And lastly, I will leave you with this thought, and I think this kind of permeates everybody in this room. If we do not intentionally include, then we may unintentionally exclude. So, thank you, thank you, thank you.